discuss and explore the place and function of preaching in the church. My name is Ben Smith, and I'm a pastor in rural South Georgia. Been preaching for, a little over 20 years, and convinced that preaching is primary, fundamental to the church. Now, this podcast is about preaching, but it's not a podcast just for preachers. Here on the View from the Pulpit podcast, I'm having conversations with pastors and hoping to explore the role of expository preaching, the labor of preparing to preach expository sermons, the effectiveness of how one preaches, and anything else related to preaching. And I'm hoping to help the church recover an understanding and appreciation for what expository preaching is and how God has ordained its role in the church. Help me spread the word by liking, subscribing, doing whatever it is in your podcast app that's called to help get the word out. And I'd always appreciate somebody you sharing this with somebody that you think would be a help. Today, it is my great pleasure to have as a guest today, Dr. Heath Lambert. He's the senior pastor at First Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida. Prior to that, he served as the executive director of Association of Certified Biblical Counselors. He has served as a faculty member of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and Boyce College. And prior to those roles, he served churches in Kentucky and in North Carolina. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Gordon College, MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and his PhD from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's an author of many books and has produced several podcasts. He and his wife, Lauren, they have two sons, a daughter, a son-in-law, and I think his most prized family member right now is one granddaughter, I believe. Dr. Lambert, so good to have you on View from the Pulpit today. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're actually just down the road from me. So Waycross is about an hour and a half north. So Jacksonville is our big city when we have to go to big city land.
Okay.
Today we're talking about preaching, and you're pastoring one of the churches in our land that has a long history of strong preaching, strong expository preaching. Tell me about how you came to that role, and how was it stepping into such a storied, historically founded biblical preaching church?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, we have a remarkable history of expository preaching here at First Baptist. We know that history goes back to the 1930s. It may go back further than that, but that's more than I can prove. But we're coming up on 100 years of every pastor at our church in 100 years being committed to expository preaching. I don't know how many churches there are in America for whom that is true, but it's not many. It's not many. And so, I've been here. I'm just about to celebrate my 10th anniversary here, and my predecessor, Mac Brunson, who was an expository preacher here, he followed Jerry Vines, who served with Homer Lindsay. They were all expository preachers. He wanted to transition away. He viewed himself kind of as a hinge figure. His hope was that he would serve after a really, really long tenure of a senior pastor and Lindsay and Vines, and before a long tenure of somebody else. And so he reached out to me in the summer of 2015 to ask if I'd be willing to come to participate in such a transition. Of course, that's ultimately the decision of the church. The church has to decide who its senior minister is, but we came with a view to do that, and immediately was excited about that. You were mentioning in my bio, I started out my ministry in pastoral ministry. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do. And through a weird series of providences, I kind of backed into being a professor and backed into being an executive director. But I never shook the first love of pastoral ministry. And so when the opportunity arose to work with Dr. Brunson, to come and serve at a place like First Baptist and to return to pastoral ministry, I was very eager to do it, and I've been here ever since.
So in that role, how have you navigated I would imagine there's got to be some pressure with just who you have followed with at the same time managing, maintaining, guarding even your own giftedness, your own skill set, your own personality in the pulpit. Have you felt any tension there?
Oh, yeah. So now here's the thing. I will say that I don't hear about it a lot from the people at First Baptist. In fact, I can't think of anybody who has ever said to me, well, you're just not as good a preacher as Mac Brunson was, or you're just not as good a preacher as Jerry Vines was, or you're just not as good a preacher as Homer Lindsay was. I don't think anybody's ever said that to me, but they have to think it. I mean, it must be on their mind because I'm not. And what that does is that just shows you how gracious and how kind everyone is. And so I could get in my head about it, and I'm not being falsely humble. Like, I am not as good a preacher as those other guys who have been here. And the way I make sense of that is, first of all, God never repeats one person's ministry in somebody else. So God raises up a man, he raises up a leader, he raises up a preacher for a purpose at a certain time, and that's it. And there's no repeat. And so God isn't going to repeat Homer Lindsay's ministry or Jerry Vines' ministry or Mac Brunson's ministry here at First Baptist. And so it frees me up from not having to feel the pressure to recreate something that isn't ever going to be, or to be something that I am not. God always raises up a particular man at a particular time with a particular set of skills with a particular message. And I trust the Lord that even though I am not those men, and even though I don't have the giftedness of those men, that for reasons that seem good and right to him, the Lord has raised me up to do the job now. It might even be, here's the thing. The Lord loves to use weakness and weak vessels so that he gets glory. And so I actually love to embrace that I'm not as great a preacher or as great a leader as those guys, and say, okay, so Lord, now you could really do something. If you can use something like me, if good things happen with me here, then that's just going to be proof that it's your grace and your glory that's doing it, and not anything having to do with me. When you put that together with the fact that in biblical preaching, the star of the show isn't the pastor, but is the word of God and the grace of Jesus. And so when I don't need to impress anybody. I don't need to put on a dog and pony show. I can just work every week and pray every week and try really hard every week to shine the biggest spotlight I can on God's word and God's son. And if I do that, then we'll all get in the spot where we need to get.
That's a good word. It's interesting that you connect that First Baptist Jacksonville for almost 100 years has been committed to expository preaching. That has not been true for most churches we're both Southern Baptist pastors, so that's not been true for most of the churches, most of the pastors in our denomination. In fact, I'm in my 50s now, and I was surprised to learn even recently that in previous generations it was not what was taught in our seminary. I was reading Boyce's book on preaching, and he has a whole chapter on you really should start with the Bible. and I was just a little befuddled with why would you're writing to seminary students as a textbook on preaching. Why would you need to talk about starting with the Bible? And his point was, if you start with the Bible, you never run out of things to say, as opposed to starting with 5 things to make your life better or whatever it is, non-biblical things. I didn't put that piece together until I began to understand that wasn't always what was being taught. So one of the things I've been most fascinated to just ask is, when did you come to appreciate and to be convinced that expository preaching was the best method of approaching the pulpit?
Yeah, so I have always been fascinated by biblical preaching. I got saved in a Southern Baptist church who said they loved biblical preaching, but I have to be honest that the pastor that was my first example was a bad example and not a good one. And so, it's possible you can get on TV saying, "Hey, this is my Bible, and I am who it says I am, and I do what it says I do," or whatever, but then put it down and then not talk about the Bible ever again. And the model I had initially was a little more like that than I wish were true. But, I will tell you, there are two huge influences on me in my high school and college years. And I started loving this kind of preaching before I knew I could be or wanted to be or would be in ministry. One was the ministry of R.C. Sproul, who I don't know if Dr. Sproul gets the credit he deserves for being the amazing homiletician that he was. The guy could take a hard text and a hard theme and preach it. There are whole doctrines that I remember what I believe about them from stories R.C. Sproul told in sermons that he preached. He is a master of engaging people with the truth of God's word. I think that sometimes gets overlooked. And then another one was my mentor in college, my New Testament professor, my pastor at the church I attended when I was in college, and actually the guy who gave me my first paid ministry position, Bill Barkley. He was my New Testament professor at Gordon College. He was the pastor at the church I attended, and he preached verse by verse expository sermons through the Bible. And so with Sproul, I got, oh, wow, this is what rich closeness to the text looks like on any given topic. And with Barkley, who became a professor at Reformed Theological Seminary and is now the pastor at Sovereign Grace Church in Charlotte. With him, I got to see every week, we pick up where we left off, and you give the truth as it lies. You give it practically, you give it relevantly, you give it powerfully. Those are my two biggest influences. The great irony is, this is kind of to your point that Baptists weren't always doing this. My two first and most profound influences were Presbyterians and not Baptists. So I obviously don't agree with them on everything, but they captivated me with regard to how they handled the text. And at first I just said, these are the only kinds of sermons I want to listen to. And now in ministry, I say, those are the only kinds of sermons I want to give.
I see just the sweetness of God's grace and providence, particularly in our circles, in that I grew up around, not so much my home church, but my grandparents' church, men who were not deeply trained, so not a lot of seminary education, but that probably helped them in that they were uncorrupted in their view of Scripture. They knew Scripture was authoritative. They weren't great expositors, but they knew Scripture was authoritative. And I'm always thankful for those men. They helped preserve the SBC from theological liberalism. And then that set the stage for others to come in and expose pastors and push our convention of churches toward expository preaching. I think the explosion of expository preaching amongst our pastors stands on top of the shoulders of men who wouldn't have known how to define that, but they did believe the Bible, And so they were like, if you're telling me the Bible's not true, you're out. And I just appreciate those men who fought that battle that I think set the stage for what has come today. I don't know if it's your experience, but it seems to me like expository preaching is the norm today rather than the exception. Is that what you see, or are you differ in that?
So it could be a sampling error because I only pay attention to what I pay attention to, but I am seeing what you're seeing, and the people that I am talking to who don't do it are a little embarrassed that they don't do it. And they're like, well, this is what we do. I talked to two Southern Baptist leaders, one leader in the Florida Baptist Convention who just retired after 30 years of ministry, most of that for the Florida Baptist Convention. And he said when he first started at the Florida Baptist Convention, he would get requests to preach and said, just preach on whatever you want. And he said the vast majority of invitations now are, hey, we're preaching through Romans. Can you take this text? That's where we'll be when you get here. We're preaching through 1 Peter. Can you take this text? That's where we'll be when you get here. And so he's just saying, hey, as I go around the state of Florida, it's amazing what has happened with the commitment to expository preaching. And then a Southern Baptist Convention president a few years ago told me that everywhere he goes, they're doing expository preaching. So it does seem to be the norm. And if true, that's a very, very happy reality.
It is. I mean, I would imagine that in the 80s and early 90s, your church, the pastors that preceded you, were the exception to the rule, not the rule,
Yes.
as far as most Baptist churches go.
Yes.
So to change the subject just a little bit, you produced a podcast, I guess about 2 years ago, called What Happened at First Baptist.
Yes.
Heath, it was an excellent podcast. And I listened to each episode, and I was particularly interested in that what happened at First Baptist Jacksonville, maybe on a larger scale, but tracks some things that I was experiencing and some other things in the nature of ministry. So I was very interested to see how you all walked through those days. Now, if those listeners who are not familiar, you shepherded the church through maybe one of the most painful, difficult transitions that I can imagine. And I know there must have been tremendous pressures you experienced going through that. Not to rehash the details, but walk me through how you particularly protected the pulpit ministry during those days in being faithful to preach without letting the emotions of the moment just crowd out faithful preaching.
Yeah. Okay, that's a hard question.
That's a loaded question.
Let me start. The only fair way to start is to admit that I had plenty of failures in doing that. So when you say without letting the emotions of the moment crowd out faithful preaching, I am aware that there were times when I failed at that. There were times when I just, my goodness, when you're standing in front of a room with thousands of people and no matter where you look, you're looking at somebody who hates you, somebody who is scowling at you, somebody who signed a petition to get you fired. You're looking at a pastor's wife who, stretching her frown down to her toes. Like, you're working to make that face. Your face doesn't just sit there like that. Like you are trying to communicate to me. There were, I look over here and, oh, you hate me. I look over there and, oh yeah, you hate me too. I'm looking back there at you and, oh yeah, you hope I fail. And there were too many times when I was distracted and put off by that. So I just want to admit that. But I think the things that I did was, first of all, I never ever wavered from, hey, this is prime real estate here. When I stand to preach, I know for a fact that everybody has to believe that I'm going to preach the Bible. And so if people start thinking, well, this is his time to grind his axe, or this is his time to come out against his enemies, this is going to be his time to have an emotional moment. If I do that, we're going to lose. And so what am I trying to do here? What I'm trying to do here is have a church that is stronger when we're done than it is now. And that is going to mean I can't back off an inch on our commitment to the preaching of the word. And so I tried to stick with the schedule. I'm very diligent to map out the schedule for preaching and to stick with it. One of the great things about expository preaching is the message of the sermon is the message of the text. And so that you might be mad or frustrated or sad or depressed some weeks, and you'd love to axe grind, but the text isn't about that. And so, hey, it's my job to preach this text. When it's the most tricky, be is when the text is about something that's going on. There would be texts about gossip, and we had weeks when it just seemed like gossip was a flame that was engulfing the whole church. And so, Lord, how do I talk about gossip in a way that is fair and honest and engaging the situation without axe grinding? Lord, help me to do that. Give me wisdom to do that. Honestly, I just have to point to the Lord's grace. There was one Sunday. I don't remember what the text was. We were going through Matthew at the time. I remember that we preached through the Gospel of Matthew, which honestly was a really great thing. One of the things I just said is we're going through Matthew because this is one of the hardest seasons in the history of our church, and we just need to see more and more and more and more and more and more and more of Jesus. We need to see him. We need to hear his words. We need to know what he thinks. And so, Lord, just give us Jesus. And when we get to heaven, when I meet Jesus face to face, if he tells me that the Matthew sermon series saved our bacon because it was just him in front of the people every week, then I will not be even a little surprised by that. But there was one Sunday when it was horrible. It was one of the worst weeks of my life, and it seemed like everybody was out to get me, and we were crying in our house every night because people were being mean to my kids and people were being mean to my wife, and I didn't know if I could stay. I didn't know if I should stay. And I had this sermon, I had these words that I'd thought about and that I'd prayed about. And we're singing, I sit down, it's the offertory, the huge First Baptist choir and orchestra is singing their huge, big song, this hymn before it's my turn to preach. And man, I didn't know how I was going to do it. I thought if I go up there, I just can't. I don't know how to stand in front of these people. I'm a broken man. I've got these lousy words on this stupid piece of paper tucked into the front page of my Bible, but I don't know how to do this. And I don't think I can. And I just started praying, Lord, if you want me to preach, you're going to have to get me up there. You're going to have to get me up there. And if you don't, if you want me to be done, I would rather go up there right now and say, guys, I just can't do this. We need to pray and go home. And so, Lord, you're going to have to make clear what you want me to do. As I was praying that, I heard the choir sing these words: even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You know that song? Mm-hmm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. They sang that. And then it's, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are on my side. And they sang that. And I was like, Lord, I wish I could hear that again. And they sang it again. I now know that one of the ways the song works is it repeats those lines over and over again. But every line, every time they repeated that line, brother, it was a fresh coat of grace on my soul. And I tell our choir, I tell our orchestra, and I tell our minister of music that there was a Sunday that God in his grace used them to sing me into the pulpit. And so I just say that to give a testament to God's grace. It was his strength working through a really weak, really broken vessel. And there was at least that one Sunday when he literally used grace to drag me into the pulpit to say what he wanted his people to hear from his word.
In those moments, and if folks don't know, it was during that season you also went through some major health crises with brain surgery. Isn't that right? That was the same season.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, mm-hmm. So double whammy all over the place.
Yeah.
How did God encourage you in those moments to keep preaching and be faithful?
So, there was a lot of things. So first of all, there was a lot of things. Let me mention a few, and I'll try to cut myself off after a few examples before I take the whole time talking about it. One thing was the people at First Baptist Church were so encouraging to me. I said, every time I'd look out, I'd see, that person hates me and that person hates me. But those people were always sitting in a sea of really encouraging, really kind people. So there was, I'll never know how many people left because that was all happening during COVID, which was insane. So I'll never know how many people left because they hated me. But it was probably a couple hundred people. And that was a really, really painful time. But that just meant the vast majority, there was thousands of people who were always so kind to me, so undeservedly kind. And always said encouraging things about my preaching, always said encouraging things about my leadership and my honesty and my transparency. And, the Lord commands encouragement. This is a real bold and brave insight into the text. The Lord commands encouragement because we need it. We need encouragement. And I needed encouragement. And he used his people to obey Scripture and give it to me. I got a call one day. I was one of those overwhelmed days. And the name on the caller ID was Dear friend. Actually, I just spoke to him right before I talked to you. Dear friend, all these years at First Baptist. And I knew that he was calling to be kind to me. And I picked it up and he said, Pastor, I was just having my devotions. And I was reading about how the Apostle Paul was in danger in the city and in danger in the towns and in danger on the road. And he'd been stoned and whipped and beaten. I was reading that and I thought about my pastor. And I said, I'm going to call and say, Pastor Heath, we're treating you pretty good at First Baptist Church. He's like, compared to the Apostle Paul, you got it pretty easy. And I thought that was such a funny and such even a thoughtful thing that this guy would be reading about the tribulations of the Apostle Paul and just want to call and share a laugh with his pastor. So there was a lot of encouragement from people. There was a lot of encouragement from other pastors. There was one man who called a pastor with a pretty good relationship in the country, and he just said, "Hey, listen, I just want to let you know that when you're suffering." He's like, you read 1 Corinthians and you read 2 Corinthians and you become aware of the Apostle Paul's sufferings. And we talk about suffering like, oh, this is hard. Maybe I shouldn't be in ministry. In the Apostle Paul's ministry, suffering is a badge of ministry. It commends your ministry. So you stick with it and don't leave. I was encouraged by my wife. We got job offers in the midst of these things. We got job offers from places that looked easier. We got job offers from people that were offering more money. And when your kids are being dragged through the mud and your wife is protective of her husband, and somebody offers you an easier job with more money, her line in the script is, let's go. And my wife just said, honey, the Lord called you here. The Lord called our family here. We cannot let these people down. And then through all that, I just had this inalterable sense from studying the Bible that in the Bible, nobody ever leaves ministry because it was hard. You just think about it. If Hosea walked away because it was what if Jesus had walked away from his ministry because it was too hard? I don't want to die on the cross. Like, you just don't have that. You have people change ministries to go do something else, but you never have anybody leave because it was hard. And so I just existing in, I'm the boil on the rear end of the historic preaching ministry, but I'm still in the line of preachers in the history of redemption, and to be in the line of Isaiah and Hosea and Jeremiah and John the Baptist and the Apostle Paul and say, I'm going to quit. I just didn't know how I could do it. And so there was a lot of internal encouragement, a lot of family encouragement, a lot of pastoral encouragement, a lot of church member encouragement that just kept me getting up to do it the next day.
That's a good word. One of the discouragements of pastoral ministry is when you prepare all week and you diligently work to prepare to preach, and when you show up on Sunday, the crowd is not what you wanted it to be. And I don't know how to. That's just a reality. You were pastoring through a season. COVID for all of us was difficult, but you were also you had some pretty serious headwinds there, and on top of that, First Jacksonville, at one point was was the largest. I guess it was the largest Southern Baptist church in the nation.
That's right.
There's some pride issues that go along with that can mess with your head and your heart.
Yeah.
How have you managed those things where they're in their proper place, and and at the same time you guard your heart against the value of preaching, regardless of the rise and fall of attendance and the celebrated dynamics of that?
Yeah. So So there's a couple of answers to that as well. The first is I just embrace it. I embrace it. When people talk to me about the legacy of preaching here, it's just the truth that I am. The apple's fallen far from the tree in terms of preaching legacy. I mean, my commitment to expository preaching is every bit the same as my predecessors, but the Lord, in His sovereign grace and mercy, just has not given me the same measure of gifting that He gave to other people. That's okay. I want to be the kind of person to say, hey, I celebrate and am thankful for the ministry of Homer Lindsay and Jerry Vines and Mac Brunson. I am thankful for that. And the Lord used them in their day to do what He did. And it's not going to be, as I said a moment ago, it's too much to expect that it would be a repeat of that. And if you've got everybody keeping score like that, if you've got Elisha kicking the rock down the road, oh man, I'm not Elijah. The Lord's not doing through me what He did through Elijah. Well, that's just a waste of time and energy. So I just embrace the giftedness thing, and I embrace the size thing. You know, when Homer Lindsay was here, they had tens of thousands of people on Sunday morning. With me here, it's a couple of thousand people. And it was a sharp decline. In fact, just to be real clear, I was here during COVID when we had to close up the place. And so I am the first pastor in the 187-year history of First Baptist Church to get the church down to 0 on Sunday morning. I'm the only pastor in the history of our church that showed up at Easter Sunday and there was nobody here.
Was it a public service?
It was a public service, and we were still doing live stream then. So we were asking nobody to come. Okay. But nobody was here. I was preaching to an empty room with cameras in it. There were some staff people there. Yes. And but nobody was here, and that's the first time in the history of First Baptist Church, 187 years. And so what I just have to do is go, you know what? What it is mine to do is not to wish that I had the ministry that other people had, but to try and figure out as best I can, Lord, in all your ways, acknowledge Him and He will make your path straight. Lord, make clear to me what the ministry that you have for me is. And the reality is the Lord, listen, if you'd told me in the middle 1970s that I could have been the pastor at First Baptist in the 1980s or in the 2020s, I'd have picked the 1980s. I'd have been like, yep, give me the second Reagan administration, give me 20,000 people, give me multiple tens of millions of dollars in budget, give me most significant leadership responsibility in the whole city, more popular than the mayor. Give me that. I would choose that over what we're dealing with now. But the reality is the Lord thought Homer Lindsay needed to be the leader of the people then, and He thinks I need to be the leader of the people now. And so trying to wish and hope and dream and lust that you had something you don't have is worse than worthless. It misses the opportunity for gratefulness. It undercuts effectiveness. And the Lord wants me to do what apparently I take it only I can do now. And so, Lord, help me to be faithful with that. I don't need somebody else's gifting. I don't need somebody else's situation. Help me to just be faithful where I am, and then draw a clear and distinct line between faithfulness and fruitfulness. It's my job to be faithful. It's my job to study the Word. It's my job to love Jesus. It's my job to get our church to be as faithful as it can be in terms of our leadership decisions. And then the Lord gets to decide who He uses and who He raises up, who He tears down. And I trust the Lord that whatever I don't have is stuff I don't need. The plenty of stuff that I do have, I need a lot of grace to handle it. So God help me to stay focused on that.
Your phrase, faithfulness, and fruitfulness, that's a helpful distinction. I don't know any pastor that doesn't look at the 1980s with some struggle of envy, and when you could put a sign out front and people would come, but I am reminded you've got prophets like Jeremiah, but even the ministry of Jesus, the more he taught, the smaller the crowds got. And the closer he got to the cross, the smaller the crowd got. And
Will and poor Isaiah, you're going to preach and nobody will hear.
Yes.
I mean, good night. That was a hard job.
Yes. And I've had some well-meaning saints equate to me, well, if we were doing it right, we would always experience growth. And that's a hard one to counter. I get, growth sort of can cover over some dysfunctional things that you don't worry about as long as you're growing. Faithfulness is harder. Or no, I shouldn't say harder, but faithfulness certainly is hard when the culture around us is not pushing people toward the church and hopefully the gospel. And I think we're in for some difficult days ahead if the Lord doesn't bring some dramatic change in our cultural dynamic.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, I think I know what you're talking about, and I think there are two basic categories of results of our faithfulness. And one of those, when we're faithful, God expands the herd. And that's the one we love. And there's examples in that of the Bible. I mean, Peter preaches and 3,000 people believed. Everybody wants Peter's ministry. That's what we want. Yeah. But then also faithfulness also thins the herd. You pointed out Jesus. I mean, Jesus did not come to bring peace, but a sword, and he thinned the herd. And a lot of people who were outwardly religious and seemed super spiritual got thinned from the herd and proved to be not really a part of the kingdom, because you can't say Jesus wasn't faithful. You can say he was faithful. And honestly, there are times when we need both. And just because we like the expansion of the herd more than the thinning of the herd doesn't mean they're both not necessary, because they both are. And what we have to do is we just ultimately have to trust what the Lord's doing. The two things about that: one, there's a lot of people who have big crowds and they're not being faithful. Yeah. And I'm telling you, I know pastors, and it breaks my heart. I know pastors who, if you gave them some gimmick that they could do, some dopey little gimmick, if you got the right so-called Christian leader with the right little thing, they do it just because what they care about is a crowd. And that's just no good. That's just no good. Sometimes what the Lord needs to do is to thin the herd and get rid of the crowd and reduce it down to the people who are faithful. And my favorite story about that is, I'm telling you, I was heartbroken. I'm talking about this on the backside of a couple of decades in ministry. I'm talking about this on the backside of ministering through the most challenging season in my life, on the backside of what I'm told by people who've been here for decades was the most controversial season in the history of First Baptist Church. So what I'm saying here is hard won. And when I got here, I just wanted to be faithful and have God honor faithfulness with the kind of fruitfulness he'd given before, which is expanding the herd. I did not want the kind of fruitfulness where the faithless people are called out.
Nobody prays for that.
Nobody prays for that, but that's what I got, and it killed me. I mean, it just almost killed me. And then after my second brain surgery, which I always say that if you can measure your life on which brain surgery you're on, you're definitely not at the top of your game. But after my second brain surgery, I came back, and it was clear that I was in a different church. Everybody was happy to see me. When I'm looking out at these people, I didn't see the people who hated me, and it was clear the people who wanted to leave left. And I remember the first couple, who was chairman of deacons at the time, the first dinner that Lauren and I had out after I got my sea legs back and was fully recovered, was with the chairman of deacons and his wife. And he said, "Hey, listen," they both were looking at us, and his wife was fighting back tears. And he said, "Listen, we know you've been through it, and we know our church lost a lot of people. And we know you've got a lash on your back for everybody that left. But we want to thank you, because our church was unhealthy. And we have never been as encouraged about the state of our church as we are right now. that was the first meal we had out. And I am not making this up. If my wife were on here, she would fully corroborate what I said. We did not have a lunch, a dinner, a coffee with church members for a year and a half without hearing that same thing. The word on the street from the people who stuck it out was, our church was in a bad spot and those people needed to leave. Here's one just interesting piece of information that I mean to encourage the kind of person you're talking about who's given it everything they've got and they're not getting these explosive results in terms of expanding the herd. The people who left, not just the people who left, there were plenty of people who left that didn't do this, but a lot of the people who left were horribly sinful towards me and my family, and said horribly sinful things online, and false accusations. And even just within the most recent weeks, there has been a clear correlation between the nastiest people and revelations of sexual immorality in their life. Now, at the time when I'm reading these horrible petitions and seeing all this stuff, I never would have said, well, I bet those people are committing adultery. I bet those people are mistreating people. But in the course of time, there has been just revelations of rank sexual immorality in the most significant forces of opposition that were directed against me at that difficult period of time. And I didn't set out to rid the church of a lot of adulterers. I didn't even know they were there. But the Lord was just doing something that I couldn't see, even when dozens of people were leaving, that I was trying to beg to stay, and they didn't. So we just have to trust that the Lord knows what he's doing. The Lord sees more than we see, and the Lord's doing more than we can tell. And the Lord is doing stuff that's better than the stuff we would do if we knew only and all that he knew.
Amen. Amen. You have spent significant amount of time in your academic career and professional career in the world of biblical counseling. Now, every pastor has to counsel, but how has your training and background in biblical counseling, how has that influenced how you approach preaching? Do you bring some of that perspective into your preaching?
Yes. Yeah. Every day, every week. So I am committed to biblical counseling. First, I was committed to biblical preaching, and then I got committed to biblical counseling for the same reason, because I just decided I want to be a Bible guy.
And before we go further, why don't you define what biblical counseling is versus general counseling that you might go from just out of the phone book?
Sure. Yeah. So biblical counseling seeks to understand the problems, difficulties, and challenges that people bring to counseling from the standpoint of the Bible. And then, having understood those problems and challenges and difficulties from the standpoint of the Bible, seeks to offer biblical solutions to those problems. It's sort of the opposite of the most dominant kind of counseling out there today, which is secular psychology, where you basically have a secular class of basically secular priests offering secular solutions to problems that they understand in a secular understanding. But I think God wrote the Bible so that the man of God would be competent for every good work. I think he wrote the Bible so that we would understand what's wrong with us and how to fix it. I think he wrote the Bible to be relevant for life, so that we would have all that we need for life and godliness through his precious and very great promises. And so I think all problems in living, I'm obviously not talking about medical problems. I went to a neurosurgeon and not a biblical counselor for my brain surgery. So I'm not talking about physical problems, but for life problems, for spiritual problems, I think God's word has the understanding of those problems and the answers for those problems. And my basic commitment since my first year of pastoral ministry is I'm just going to be a Bible guy. I'm going to preach Bible sermons. I'm going to do Bible counseling. I'm going to run the business meeting in a Bible way. I appreciate that that's not Robert's Rules of Order. Thanks. But I think what we need to do here is just focus on what the Bible says about this. And I've just decided I'm going to lash myself to the mast of the Bible. And if it goes down, I'm going down with it. And all of us get things wrong in in our life, and when whoever's doing my eulogy, they'll be able to acknowledge that there were things I got wrong. But if my instinct is to err on the side of the Bible, then I'd rather have my errors over there with that than in whatever the other option is. And so I've just been committed to being biblical in all those areas, or at least trying to be. God help me. And the thing with biblical counseling, I did it. I started it in my first ministry. Started trying to do it because I just wanted to be helpful. I had people who were being sexually abused and mistreating one another and arguing. I was like, okay, I don't have the heart to preach to these people on Sunday, and then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, tell them I got nothing for them. So I just want to try to be faithful to the Word of God with the people God has given me, and so I'm going to try to do it. And here's what happened. What I never anticipated is I became a better preacher because. And if you listen to me now and you think I'm not that good, well, then just imagine how bad I was before. I think it helps. And the reason it helps is because I think a fundamental error that pastors who are committed to preaching the Bible, a fundamental error, by the time you're on board with Jesus and the Bible and you say, I want to preach expository sermons, I think the most common error is to preach to your commentaries. To preach to theological debates out there in the world, to preach like the people in the pew are concerned about the same grammar and syntax issues as the people who wrote the books you read that week. And that is just not true. We need to read commentaries, and I read a lot of them, and we need to understand the text. But a sermon is an interaction with your people. And so you have got to present the truth of God's word in its grammatical historical context. Yes, absolutely. But we're not just repeating history, and we're not having academic debates. I use all of that understanding, and then I'm asking the fundamental question of all this stuff that I now know about this text. What do my people need to hear? And here's the thing. If you are not having conversations with your people, if you're not listening to their problems, if you don't know where they struggle, the only thing you'll know how to do is have an esoteric conversation with your commentary. And so you will dramatically increase your relevance when you're having the kinds of counseling conversations that biblical counseling requires. And here's the thing, you'll also figure out how to communicate better. Like when you've got somebody, you can say nonsense from the pulpit and people might sit there and give you a polite hearing. But if you've got a married couple who's fighting like cats and dogs through the week, you have to make sense to them, and you're going to know immediately in the room whether they understand what you're talking about or not. And so it will just make sure you're talking like one of your sheep in language that they understand, and you're talking about issues that they appreciate. And so I am a far better preacher than I ever was before, because I've just been committed to hanging out with sheep and understanding their problems and understanding how to apply the word in a way that makes sense.
You wrote an article I ran across not too long ago called 5 Marks of a Good Sermon. I don't know how recent it was.
That's brand new. I just did that this week.
Okay, good. And one of the points you made was a good sermon is practical, which is that point that it has to connect with the actual problems and issues that you're, and I think you used the phrase proper biblical living out the gospel. And that was a good word there.
Yeah, we wrote that article because we've got our church since the 80s has been trying to help pastors, and mostly that was with our pastors conference through the 80s and the 90s. But we just this year launched a First Baptist Ministry Institute where we are asking people to come to learn how to do counseling, to learn how to do ministry leadership, to learn how to do transition and revitalization. And come January 15th to the 18th, we're going to be adding a preaching track. And so that article was about kind of promoting, like, hey, here's what we think is a good sermon, and we're going to be talking about how to do that faithfully at this new institute, because we want one of the things I know from being a former seminary professor. I have seminary degrees. I helped a lot of people get seminary degrees. I'm for seminary education, but seminary education is limited. It can give you facts. But implementation needs the local church. And so we want to be able to take some of the things that we have learned here at First Baptist and help other pastors and other prospective pastors, like, hey, here's how you implement the good knowledge that you might have picked up. And so we had one round of that back earlier in the year. And we had a lot of current pastors and a lot of future pastors, and it was such a success, we decided to do it again. So that's what that article was for.
That's encouraging. It may surprise folks to realize that seminary can train you well for doctrinal issues, theological issues, but at least in my experience, there wasn't a lot of training in how to preach. And so I had to kind of learn as I went, which meant there was some long periods there of some pretty poor preaching as I was trying to figure out what in the world I was doing. So in fact, this podcast has just been interesting. Sunday school teachers, folks that have responsibilities for teaching, some of the more practical things we talk about, like how do you put together a sermon? How do you start from a text and get to the pulpit? Those things have been probably some of the more helpful subjects we've talked about, just as folks are trying to figure out how to do it. So on that subject, talk to me about your preparation process. You at First Baptist have lots of demands upon you, and so your time is, everybody's time is precious, but the more demands, the more fight you have to have as far as managing your own schedule. Walk me through your week. You've got your text, you're preaching through a book, so that the text selection is taken care of. But walk me through your Monday through Sunday, from starting with the text all the way to the preaching on Sunday.
Okay, so you're right about the demands. And so I have worked very, very carefully with my assistant. My assistant is, she does a lot of things for me, but one of my affectionate titles for her is my scheduler. So we have worked really, really hard to figure out, okay, here are the priorities. Here is what I make room for. Here's what I can't make room for. Here's what's going to have to be pushed off to somebody else. Hey, here's some things that I could do, but I can't do it at these times because there's priorities. And so she has built a very, very high and thick fence around several priorities, Sunday morning preaching being one of them. Honestly, increasingly, Sunday morning preaching begins for me on the previous Sunday night. So one thing that I'd say at the beginning is I am not a Saturday guy. There are a lot of Saturday guys who are better preachers than I am. I just can't do it. I would be so stressed out every day, all day long, if I knew Saturday was coming and then I had to use it. So God bless people who do it, but that's just not the way I'm wired. Increasingly, after church, we have Sunday evening services on the Lord's Day at First Baptist, and increasingly, just this has been a drift over the last year or so. I am starting on my commentary reading for next week's sermon on Sunday night. Sunday nights are pretty chill at our house. My wife will make, maybe eggs or something, and everybody's just kind of chilling out and doing whatever. And I just find that I want to get a jump on it. And so I'll grab a couple of commentaries and sit there and just start reading it. And that buys me some time on Monday, which is the biggest prep day for me in the week in terms of the slog of it. But after that, so I start reading commentaries, usually now on Sundays, but if nothing else, definitely on Monday. And I typically read 3 to 4 commentaries on a topic. Different people do different things. You know how it is. I mean, by the time you've been in ministry a couple of decades, I've been studying the Bible my entire adult life now. So there's a lot. I'm actually amazed at how much I've grown in knowledge over the years. And so it's not like those 3 or 4 books is the sum total that I know about or have thought about the text. There's other things that are flying in there on really controversial things, really complicated things. I will read more. I preached through Revelation a few years ago, and I was reading 10 to 12 commentaries for that just because I wanted to be really, really careful. But I read commentaries, and the main thing for me on Monday is I say Mondays are for meaning. Like I want to know the meaning of the text. Sometimes I get further along than that, but I don't want to be able to read the text and have questions about what it means or my understanding of it. I want to sort that out on Monday. And then through the week, every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I am reading and rereading and rereading the text. I'm praying over the phrases. I'm praying over the words. I'm looking at the grammar. I'm looking at word occurrences and what this word means and that kind of thing. I'm doing that every day, all day long. And then the only day of the week that I usually never work on the sermon is on Tuesday. Tuesday is a big meeting day at First Baptist. I have my meetings start at 7 a.m. and I'm lucky to get out of here at 6. So Tuesdays are a big day for meetings. But then I'm back on Wednesday morning. I'm back on Thursday morning. And from Monday to Thursday, I'm going from meaning to what is my burden. So I got this text. There's all sorts of things that I could say about it. I'm not going to be able to say everything about it. And so of everything that I could say, God, give me wisdom about what your people most need to hear. And so after I understand the meaning, the next big thing is, what's my burden? What do I want to say about this? Then my next step is what we call around here the angle. What's going to be my way in? So I'm preaching on Sodom and Gomorrah this week. It's Genesis 19. And so my burden is, I want the people of First Baptist Church to know that judgment has come and a greater and more dreadful judgment is coming. And so that's my burden. So Lord, help us to see that this judgment from history is a precursor of the great and terrible judgment that is coming for those who don't trust in Jesus Christ. So I'm praying that, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about what my angle is. And so right now, here you're talking to me on Wednesday afternoon. Right now, my plan is that my angle is that some locations become so synonymous with disaster. Sodom and Gomorrah. There's a number of examples throughout history where a place becomes synonymous with disaster. And when you read the New Testament and their treatment of Sodom and Gomorrah, you get 2 Peter, you get Jude. And it's not just that Sodom and Gomorrah is a place of disaster, but it's an example of what's coming. So what are the examples that we can learn as Christians from Sodom and Gomorrah about the judgment that awaits us? So right now on Wednesday, that's my angle. It's judgment. God protect us. What are the examples that we can learn as we prepare for the worst judgment to come? My self-imposed deadline for sermon notes is Thursday morning at 11. So I submit my sermon notes to our team here on Thursday morning. And so there's a lot that's locked in come Thursday. And that our media team needs it. Our communications team needs it. Our security team needs it. Our security team likes to know. We sometimes have security problems here with people who write threatening things and tell me if I talk about this topic again, they're going to kill me or whatever. So our security likes to know if I'm going to be talking about something that has upset people in the past and could likely create a problem. So there's just all sorts of people that our Sunday school leadership likes to know what's coming. So Thursday at 11, I send my detailed notes to our team here so all the different folks can begin doing their work. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I tell people, if you're seeing me sit at a red light or if you're seeing me sit at my living room, I am just thinking and praying about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. And then I'm just kind of, that's the hum of the engine of my brain is the sermon. I'm thinking about it. I'm praying about it. I'm on my knees reading the Bible about it. And then on Sunday morning, I go into the pulpit with just my Bible and no notes and preach what comes out.
I was going to ask if you were notes or manuscript, but you are a memorized guy.
Not memorize. So it's funny. I don't try to memorize it. My goal is not that I would memorize it. My goal is I want what I have studied to come into my heart and out of the overflow of my heart, I want my mouth to speak. So the only thing I memorize are the headings that I gave to that I submitted on Thursday. I do stick with that because that would be confusing if I've got a different outline than what they're putting up on the screen or whatever. But I don't try to memorize it. In fact, one of the fascinating things is how often I find myself saying surprising things that I hadn't planned on saying. Not tangents and out in left field stuff, but just as my heart has been soaking in the text for 6 days, when you're there in front of the Lord and you're in front of His people, the things that come out as application or more urgent than you thought they would be, or you're moved in ways you thought you wouldn't be moved. So it's not memorization. It's just sort of soaking, and whatever comes out kind of comes out.
Well, I mean, I'm impressed. I've listened to you preach. I would not have thought no notes. You're well spoken enough that it sounds well put together. I would be, my personal dynamic, I'd be scared to death to go to the pulpit without notes. I've heard guys like you do it, and I think my anxiety would overwhelm me. Do you write mostly at home, or you write mostly at church?
Monday is the big slog day, and I usually do that at home. Mostly, probably 90% of it is at home.
And how many services are you preaching on a Sunday?
Now we have multiple services, but we've. I'm only preaching one. Our vision is we have multiple campuses, and our vision is to have live preaching from a campus pastor. So I've preached in my time at First Baptist. I've preached a lot more than that, but right now it's just one.
But you have Sunday night services as well. So somebody else is preaching that service?
Yeah. So we do a separate sermon series on Sunday night. So like right now on Sunday morning, we're preaching through Genesis. And so that's always me. And then on Sunday evenings, we're preaching through the great stories of the Bible. And so that is a rotation. We've got 20 pastors. And so I sign up all 20 of them to preach a couple, and I'll preach one or two.
Nice, but that gives them opportunities. Are those your campus pastors, or are those pastors that are on staff there at the main campus?
It's both. Some of them are campus pastors. Some of them are pastors at the main campus, student pastors, executive pastor, associate pastors, education pastors. It's the whole crew.
Excellent. Well, Heath, I want to be a good steward of our time, but I want to end with a question that I've been asking most of my guests. But before I do want to commend listeners. If you've not given some time to listen to the podcast, What Happened at First Baptist, Heath, it really is an excellent work, and it's brutally honest, and it's brutally heartbreaking at moments, and yet it also, if you listen to it all the way through, you can't miss the preservation of the Lord's hand upon First Baptist, and just grace through that situation. But one of the things I know is when you go through some moments like that, those hard, difficult, gut-wrenching moments are also moments where you see more clearly how God is providing, how God is leading. Your prayer life is much different in those situations. So Heath, at this point in your ministry, if you could speak back to young Heath Lambert before brain surgery, before First Baptist Jacksonville, before the hard times that you've experienced, what would you say to your younger self? Brother, these are the things that are vitally important. Invest your life in these things. And these are the things you think are important, but they're worthless. Put them aside.
Yeah. I would say, let me answer it this way. The shock of my life, the shock of my life is how different my ministry is from what I thought it would be. So everybody goes into ministry, everybody. I know this, my dearest friends are pastors. I work with a team of pastors. I was a seminary professor for 10 years, training future pastors. I think I feel a high level of comfort in saying I know what I'm talking about when I say people go into ministry because of a vision of ministry that they want. I've never in 25 years talked to somebody who said, I went into ministry because I wanted to make myself miserable. I wanted people to hate the faithful things I said. I wanted to stick my neck out there every week and be a nervous wreck and be maligned and criticized. Nobody says that. Everybody has something good they want to do for the Lord, some good way they want to serve people. And they usually have a concrete expression of what that looks like. They're looking at their pastor and they want to do that job, or they saw Al Mohler get interviewed and they want to be Mr. Brains like that guy, or they saw John MacArthur and they're like, I want to preach to church like John MacArthur. Everybody has some positive example, and your ministry is not going to be that. And I just didn't know it. I told you, I wanted to be the pastor at Farmdale Baptist Church with 150 people on Sunday morning. I wanted to be at every funeral. I wanted to be at the births. I wanted to do every wedding. I never wanted to move. I wanted to be there. And I never became the senior pastor of that church. I was the associate pastor, but I was never the senior pastor, and I was there 2 years. And I couldn't believe that I left. I couldn't believe there was a remarkable set of providences, and we went to another church. But and if you had told me when I was 20 that I'd be having this conversation with you at 45 from First Baptist Jacksonville, doing everything I've done, I couldn't have even understood what you were talking about. And the point is, actually, I said this earlier, God intends to give you a ministry that's different than your heroes. He intends to give you a ministry that is different than your predecessors. God is always raising up a new generation of preachers, of new leaders, of new ministers, and there's never repeat, ever. And so your actual ministry, Heath, young little whippersnapper Heath, the ministry you actually have is going to be defined the deaths that need to take place in your soul to what you thought your ministry was going to be. The Lord has a ministry for you that is better and more important than the one you're imagining, but you've got to take up your cross and follow Jesus to find it. There's going to be pain in that. There's going to be death in that. There's joy on the other side of it when you learn to embrace that, hey, it is God who gets the pieces on the chessboard where he wants them to be. It is God who has your ministry planned out and has a plan for your ministry, but that's not you. And so you need to in fact, back during COVID, when they were telling you to wash your hands for 20 seconds, every time I'd wash my hands, I'd just sing Wherever He Leads, I'll Go. Because I was like, Lord, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be having these fights. I don't want to be ministering in a pandemic. I don't want to come to church on Easter Sunday with 0, but wherever you lead, I'll go. And when you can find yourself saying, I will be faithful with what the Lord has, even if that's not what I wanted, that's when you're going to find your ministry, and that's when you're going to find more joy than you thought you could find.
That is an excellent word. Thank you, brother. Well, Heath Lambert, thank you so much for your generosity of time today and sharing your story and talking about preaching. It's been a great conversation.
Well, I am equally grateful. I'm most grateful for you and most grateful for your ministry, and happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for listening to View from the Pulpit. For more information, go to my website at bensmithsenior.org. That's bensmithsr.org. You can follow me on X at x.com/Ben Smith SR. I look forward to meeting you next week for another conversation on View from the Pulpit.